And that just like experience, really, I think stuck with me, just like the power of brands that are able to grow organically and that, generate earned media. And I think and I really do believe in this notion that, brands are effectively becoming media companies now.
Here we are again, another open dialogue. Phil Toronto here, host of the Tartar Project and also host of Open Dialogue. I have Ben of Recess with me today. Thank you for joining me, especially at this early hour on the West Coast. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, my pleasure. Excited to connect.
It's gonna be a good time. I've seen Recess pretty much. It's almost impossible to avoid Recess. If you would want to, you wouldn't want to, obviously. But you guys are everywhere. It's amazing. I think just before diving in, like what were you doing before you started Recess?
Yeah. So first off, thanks for having me. So yeah, I did not come from the beverage and CPG industry. I started my career in I guess Silicon Valley, working at two different early stage tech startups that were both in the kind of marketing technology space. But I always knew I wanted to start my own company. And I'd say at my core, like I'm a creative. Growing up, I was very into kind of art and design and thought I was gonna, pursue something, in the creative fields. But I'm 32, and so I graduated in 2010, right when the kind of Silicon Valley startup scene was emerging, and that was the place to be. But it was a great experience because I think I learned, how to build a company, and just was kind of around, that entrepreneurship culture there. And kind of, anyways, after 7 years, decided to set out on my own and moved to New York and explored a couple different ideas. I actually teamed up with two friends in a firm at the time called Life Capital, and the idea was to kind of incubate various ideas and invest in companies as well, but just kind of try and figure it out. And basically the idea for Recess came about as I'd seen CBD oil kind of bubbling up on the periphery in natural food stores. And I've always been, a naturally kind of stressed out, anxious, wired person, and kind of had, experimented with various things to help me kind of calm down and, reset and rebalance through, various points in my day. And I started using CBD oil. And, when I did, I felt better. I felt more balanced, more even keeled. And as a result, I felt more productive, more creative, and less stressed out and anxious. And I just had a number of insights from that experience. The first being, I'm not the only one that feels this way. That stress and anxiety had already, been kind of exploding kind of as a result of this transformational period in history that we're living in. The introduction of technology and social media and kind of all the second and third order consequences of that clearly was leaving us unsettled. And I just saw that kind of accelerating. And that's like an antidote to modern times. Like that line is, encapsulating this idea. The second insight was around CBD itself. Basically, like the user experience of putting oil that tastes like grass under your tongue is not a great one.
Exactly.
But the way to think about CBD is as a compound, just no more interesting than caffeine or alcohol, just a commoditized functional ingredient that delivers a feeling, and that the opportunity for CBD would be viewing it as an ingredient in various applications and then building a brand on top of it. I like to think of CBD as almost like the caffeine of the 21st century. And who are the biggest caffeine companies? It's Starbucks, it's Red Bull, it's Monster, it's Coca-Cola, and they're not marketing caffeine, they're marketing how it makes you feel. Exactly. Right? And that was the key insight, I'd say, was that CBD, importantly among other functional ingredients, because CBD is only one of 4 functional ingredients in Recess. There's 3 other adaptogens, would basically serve at the base of the next big category in CPG focused on relaxation, as opposed to stimulation from caffeinated beverages or alcohol or, whatever. And when I had the idea, when I had that like original insight, I didn't know a single person that had ever worked in the CPG industry or cannabis industry for that matter. It never even crossed my mind to look at the space, right?
Right.
But what I observed was, beverage brands in particular are some of the biggest brands in the entire world, right? And there's a reason that is. the first and foremost is that, there's no other product on the planet that gets as much, that's as high a frequency of use as a beverage, right? People that drink Starbucks drink it multiple times per week. People that drink Red Bull typically drink it multiple times per week. Gatorade, LaCroix, et cetera. Like once these brands become part of your life, it becomes a frequent habit. The second part is no other product gets as much distribution as a beverage. So it's a form of marketing for your idea in some ways, just like being on the shelf to, what you point to as well. And then I think most importantly is that the best and most, successful enduring beverage brands kind of market an emotion, right? They're not marketing the ingredient, they're marketing how it makes you feel. Red Bull gives you wings, Coca-Cola is about happiness, and Americana. And that, as a result of those dynamics, the biggest, CP beverage companies are effectively media companies.
Totally.
Red Bull is a media company for the action sports community that monetizes through selling cans. That's how I look at that business. And that's how I saw it. And I was just like, I think what I saw early on is like people talk about like beverage companies like as if they're just like the liquid in the can, right? And they're not. They're much bigger than that. And getting all those elements right is required to make it work. And that what I saw was that effectively the playbook of the past would be completely outdated. Like the way these most recent brands, including White Claw, most recently have gone to market is essentially how Coca-Cola went to market 100 years ago, right? And that essentially, like I like to say, in the past, brands were built on the shelf and just like the brand building itself. I'm not talking about distribution. Today, the brand building is going to occur on your phone primarily, and that would fundamentally change everything.
Totally.
Right? So I was like, I see this category emerging, and I'm going to go build the brand in a new way, right? And that's when you talk about kind of our D2C launch. And I can kind of come back to the whole strategy there. The fourth point was around the regulation, right? And I wasn't going to start a business selling a controlled substance indefinitely.
Exactly. Which is exactly what cannabis is. Just for the viewers that don't know, it is categorized as a controlled substance.
Or marijuana is. So so the hemp.
That's right.
So at the time, CBD was still a controlled substance. Marijuana and hemp were viewed and classified as the same thing, when in reality they're cousins within the cannabis family. With one critical difference, hemp is very low in THC. And I'd heard about a piece of legislation being introduced by Mitch McConnell called the U.S. Hemp Farming Act that essentially says, like, we want hemp to be, one of the future crops of America. And I'm like, well, if Mitch McConnell wants this to happen, it's probably going to happen. And if, farmers are allowed to cultivate all this hemp and, CBD is ultimately removed from the controlled substance list, shifting the regulation from the DEA to the FDA, I think CBD will ultimately become, an approved food additive and dietary supplement ingredient, right? And so much of the Recess business plan has been to kind of navigate this period of regulatory uncertainty to establish ourselves as the category kind of leading brand where we can, best positioned, to scale rapidly as regulatory opens up, right? Totally. So I probably spend 30 to 40% of my time on regulation, right? Like different things associated with that. But, I viewed that as kind of a net positive in some ways because it kept the big beverage companies from entering the market and would give us this window to establish ourselves as, the category leader. And, I think the other thing I saw was that, in CPG, the difference between creating a category and going into an existing category and trying to take market share are two completely different things. And in a category creation dynamic like this is both, the CBD beverage category, but I think more broadly a relaxation category, the winners win big kind of thing, right? Like look at White Claw, hard seltzer 5 years ago was a $25 million a year category. Now it's a $3 billion a year category. And it's like White Claw and Truly have like something like 80% market share, right? And it's because once you become that, kind of default first choice in a consumer's mind and the default first choice for a retailer and distributor, that compounds on itself. And so anyways, there's kind of those 4 areas that, ultimately guided, the business plan and like kind of what you see out there. But it's been a journey, and I didn't know anything about the industry. I literally went on Google to start like, how do you make a drink, right? But I think it's actually been a strength, and an asset, not a liability, because I was able to think differently, and come from with a fresh perspective, especially on the brand side, and then ultimately surround myself with a lot of people that have done it before, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the key, is to build out the team, like build out the people smarter than you, be the dumbest person in the room. Not to say that you're dumb by any means, obviously.
I trust me. That is
that's fair. And definitely I want to highlight, you touched on it first, like you were, from what I can remember, the pinnacle of direct-to-consumer entering into the cannabis space. Like, you have created Recess, which was the first brand that I saw everywhere that was also widely distributed doing CBD, which just was pretty mind-blowing in and of itself. So you touched on it. What are some of the regulatory issues that you do have to combat that probably a normal CBG company, like you highlighted just with how you started the business, what don't they have to deal with that you have to have top of mind all the time?
Yeah. So basically, when the timing was perfect in some ways, because we launched 1 month before this bill called the Hemp Farming Act passed, and that essentially shifted the regulation of CBD from the DEA, which controls controlled substances, to the FDA, which controls like our food system and supplements and pharmaceuticals and things like that. And but something just doesn't go from a controlled substance to a 100% approved food additive overnight. There would have to be kind of a process to determine how the compound can be used, what are the labeling requirements, what are the dosage requirements, and that's what we've been going through. And so it's kind of an unprecedented situation, actually, in the history of our food system, where you have a category as big as CBD is now across many different products that is essentially in regulatory limbo, right? And so it all comes from the fact that CBD is not yet an approved food ingredient, which is what Recess is classified as, or dietary supplement ingredient for that matter. And that as a result of that, national retailers, Whole Foods, CVS, Duane Reade, they want Recess, but they can't take it yet.
Totally.
Amazon, won't carry us either at this point, and everything is more challenging. It's harder to advertise. It was hard to get banking at the beginning. It was hard to process payments. We had to shift our manufacturing multiple times. Like, everything is harder, right? But in some ways, like, that is where the value is created, right? Because we have had to navigate a lot, right? And it's just by definition harder to operate in the space than everywhere else. And so I think the secret of Recess is that there's this paradox of Recess, which is we're both not a CBD company at all, right? And from the brand side, how we speak, and I can talk about how I thought about that, but we are also by far the most engaged company in America on the issue of CBD and food and beverages.
Yeah, right? I would definitely agree with that.
I've had to, we've been lobbying in New York State for over a year, and we finally got a bill regulations introduced, which fully legalize CBD beverages and establish a dosage limit up to 25 milligrams, which we're an advocate for, and that goes into effect, in January. I serve as the executive vice president of it's called the U.S. Hemp Roundtable. It's the main industry coalition that represents all of the farmers, the extractors, the processors, and the brands like Charlotte's Web and Laura Jones and us, and we're very active in DC, and so long story short, it's an important dynamic of the business and very much in the background. And in some ways I think Recess, I like to say, it feels like CBD is everywhere, but it's actually nowhere in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
So what happens when all of a sudden every national retailer has built out this category, right, across beverages and supplements? That's when the game, really begins for that ingredient.
Yeah, then you have a hell of a head start.
Yeah. So, but no, it's tricky, right? And it's hard. In a startup, so much is driven by time, right? And And yeah, and so, fortunately, like we also think bigger than CBD. And so, we have the ability to, like, I think so much the conversation around CBD is this weird social construct. Like I've never heard anyone refer to Red Bull as a caffeine company in my life.
Right.
And it's almost as if when people talk about CBD, it's like the only ingredient on the planet that, can help you feel calm and relaxed. It's just simply not true. And so there's, lots of things, we can do. And, we really think of, Recess as a broad like brand platform that can go into a lot of different categories and usage occasions in a consumer's day.
Totally. One thing I want to touch on, and then I want to jump back to the different categories you can jump into, because you already started exploring that a little bit. But one thing I noticed, and you highlighted, like these beverage brands are media companies in and of itself. Everybody's living on their phone. How did you take that thinking and apply it to your social media strategy? Because that's essentially where you've built a ton of the clout for the brand, also physically, but that's primarily been where people can find you despite not being able to advertise properly. So what was the thinking behind that?
Yeah. So I think with our launch, the thing I recognized, well, first of all, it was me and one other person, and the company was based in my apartment. And it was just like, we weren't, it was almost that we had to do a direct to consumer launch just because we were that small.
Right.
But I think more importantly than that, we really had to introduce this new idea out into the world, right? Of taking a recess. We had to define the feeling, calm, cool, collected, not tired, not wired. It's how you wish that 2 o'clock coffee made you feel. This was not something where you could just go slap CBD on the label and that's enough. Like, I think that's what I think most people in cannabis and CBD have gotten wrong. It's overly marketing the ingredient instead of focusing on how does your brand fit into someone's life, right? And so our strategy was really about getting the idea of Recess out into the world and getting our story out there and the narrative, right? So I look at Recess as a narrative-driven brand in some ways, right? And so our launch strategy was about, again, introducing the usage occasion of taking a recess, defining the feeling, and building the buzz online in order for us to go offline, right? Which we ultimately did, to your point. The social strategy was all about, so first and foremost, like we are marketing, I wanted to focus on creatives, similar to how Red Bull focused on the action sports community and Gatorade focused on professional athletes, right? That was the community I wanted to set out kind of and activate over time. And I think we've just really started with designers. Like, I don't think we've gone into music, fashion, like true internet culture. I think there's a lot of places this could go, but in the early days, I wanted to speak to, a very specific person, which is almost like the New York agency kind of creative crowd, right? It was like marketing to market in some way. Right. And so, I think core part of the strategy is like to connect with creatives, create yourself. Right. I think creatives respect other creatives in the act of making something. So it's just like, we're going to do one Instagram post a day, which is like high concept, which again, indirectly communicates the idea of Recess and how it fits into their life. Right. So the early stuff was all about, I'd say, kind of, again, defining usage occasions and defining the feelings. And just really driving home that narrative. And then over time, it's all about like, what do we want someone to feel when they drink a Recess? We want them to feel thoughtful, clever, creative, inspired, introspective. And so we have to like do that ourselves every day with the content we create. And so I like to think of Recess as like, there's Recess you consume in your body and Recess you consume in your mind, and they're of equal importance to achieving our mission.
Totally.
Interestingly, like stress and anxiety is this story we tell ourselves in our head. Like we convince ourselves we're stressed, and so the opposite of being stressed in some ways is feeling nothing, right? Feeling calm. And so that's a very different thing than something like energy, right? Where it's like, you are like, when you have a nice coffee, I just had a nice coffee. I'm not up until like I have a little sip of caffeine. Right. But you feel that immediately. Yeah. Right. Alcohol is a similar thing. I think what we're kind of connecting with is something more subtle and nuanced, but in some ways much bigger. right? Because there's all these different like nuanced usage occasions throughout consumers' days for taking a recess.
Yeah.
And I can kind of talk about that because I do think it's interesting. Like what I saw early on, which I never considered, is just all the different ways people are taking a recess. Like I'd say the two core use cases are in the afternoon, kind of as a substitute for your afternoon coffee, as that kind of an afternoon pick me up to kind of reset and rebalance so you could focus on your work the rest of the day, or in the evening as a substitute for alcohol.
Right.
And so, but you know, in addition to that, a lot of people drink it right when they get up in the morning and start their day calm. A lot of people drink it before bed. A lot of people drink it just throughout the day while they're working. A lot of people drink it before and after a workout. And so I was always like, well, your total addressable market for a CPG brand is like a function of what are the usage occasions in a day. Like people don't drink energy drinks at night. People don't drink alcohol in the morning. In theory, I'm looking at, you know, the early data would suggest people are drinking recess for a lot more different reasons than those.
Right.
And then, you know, ultimately over time, it's like, what are the points of distribution? You know, your brand makes sense to be sold. You know, Coca-Cola is the most valuable brand in the world because it's literally everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, Monster Energy is a $37 billion company that's just built in the convenience store channel, right? And like, again, there's some early indicators that, you know, we work on premise, we work everywhere. We work, you know, in grocery stores, we work at gas stations and liquor stores in LA. Like there's just a lot of places the brand works. And so, you know, part of this, my strategy over time is to kind of make recess feel like it's everywhere, like all around you.
Totally.
Right? Because, you know, that's what is required to build, you know, a beverage brand that truly gets to scale.
Yeah. And I think you've done a really good job of that because I know you launched direct to consumer, obviously, but and even to this day, I don't think I can go into a deli or a grocery store in New York with the places that I shop and not see recess cans, which I think you've done a phenomenal job of actually having a physical presence in a lot of stores. Mm-hmm. So that's been really impressive.
Yeah, no, it's critical. Like, I mean, that's the other thing. It's like D2C beverage just doesn't make any sense, right? Like beverages need to be all around you to drive that, you know, that repeat rate. Like that's what you want your beverage to become, you know, for someone to drink it multiple times per week, ideally, and to create something that's good enough for that, right? And the nature of it is like being thirsty is like, you know, you're thirsty at all these different places, right? So whether you're grocery shopping or at a cafe having lunch, you know, or ultimately at a bar, right? You know, we want to make it available to you there.
Definitely. So now I want to jump back to the different lines that you're exploring, because you did just jump into like merch and apparel. Like what was the thinking there, and what were your first forays into doing so?
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of recess has been one, it's like I have this very long-term orientation, you know, with the brand. Like there's no question in my mind that there's going to be a relaxation category that's worth, you know, multi-billions of dollars. You know, even say 50% of what the energy drink category is. I think it has potential to be bigger, but you know, I wanted to basically create a brand platform and a marketing engine that was ultimately very scalable and enduring, that did not require a lot of paid media. We've spent very, very little money on paid media to generate this awareness, right? So everything we do is about creating content and experiences, both digital and physical, that consumers want to engage with deeply and share with their friends, right? And then I also wanted to kind of create this, you know, world around the beverage, right? I think what people connect to recess about is everything, right? All of it together. And I think, and so we, you know, first started with, you know, our Instagram content, you know, and that whole strategy, you know, has scaled and evolved and, you know, very organically. The next big thing we did was Recess IRL, which was our pop-up in New York.
Like 2018, I think,
yeah,
right? It was on Broadway.
We launched that. No, we launched in 2018, and we launched in late October 2018. So we launched that in like February 2019, I think. And that was like so organic. The reason we did that is because the company was based in my apartment on Fifth Street in Bowery, and we needed an office. And we're like, I hate co-working spaces.
Right.
And I'm like, what if there's all this empty like ground floor retail space. What if we like put our office in the back and like did an art activation up front? Like that was the original plan. And then it kept kind of just growing and growing. Like, we're not going to fit back there. Let's just take the whole thing now.
Right.
And with that, it was like we wanted to create a space, in the middle of Manhattan that felt like you were walking, into our Instagram, or like the feeling we want you to feel when you drink a Recess. So it was like very much like the digital brand, IRL in reality.
Totally.
And then we also wanted to create a space that, served as, a community gathering place for the creative community in New York, where we could host events with other brands or creative partners. And so I think that was, subtly one of the most important things we did.
Totally.
For the first 6 to 8 months or something, we were hosting, I think, like on average 3 events a week, at that space with different partners. And so, we've always been everything, and that was all about like, how can we just build this buzz and awareness, in New York, and not even talk about the CBD. Like, that's the secret of Recess, is that we don't talk about CBD ever. Right. And it's just because I don't think consumers actually care about it.
Right.
Like, care about vitamin C, right? Like, not really, right?
Not particularly, yeah.
Right. And so everything was about kind of marketing that feeling and connecting emotionally with consumers and doing things that generated earned media, right? Because it's funny, like my first startup out of college, it was a 3-person startup that was building kind of an influencer marketing platform back in 2010 that launched on MySpace, basically, right? And it was all about, we identified that, social media marketing ultimately is about generating earned media and making things go viral. And like, how could you kind of catalyze that and help brands catalyze that? And that just like experience, really, I think, stuck with me. Just like the power of brands that are able to grow organically and that, generate earned media. And I think I really do believe in this notion of that, brands are effectively becoming media companies now. Totally. Right. And so, everything we've done is kind of had that in mind, right? Like, how can this kind of build that buzz and deliver the emotion of what we're, offering?
And then most recently, I would say, like, going outside of the beverage itself, I think you launched a blanket, which is now sold out. And then you've launched a couple other SKUs, I guess, that are not beverage whatsoever. What are those?
I forgot to touch on that point. Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
Yeah. So I just kind of set out to develop this world, first starting with the content, which I think is most importantly about our brand voice, then Recess IRL, which kind of started the collaborative nature of Recess, where we're kind of going to be a collab brand with different creatives and other brands to kind of create products within and experiences within the world. But ultimately, I saw an opportunity to basically bring our design capabilities and our visual language and approach, to other objects, like shirts and sweatshirts and socks and blankets. And, look, it's still at a small scale, but I think it's been very effective at expanding, the brand and, creating things that you can kind of touch and feel that, actually, can we start over on this question?
100%.
Yeah. So let me, reality where.
So I'll re-ask you.
Yeah.
So to the point where you're actually expanding outside of the beverage category, you have jumped into things that aren't beverages. So I think I saw that you launched a blanket, which is actually, it's sold out, but there are a couple other SKUs outside of beverage that you're exploring with Recess. Like what are those? Can you talk about those a little bit more?
Yeah. So the first thing I'd say is that falls within like our marketing tactics, right? We're not becoming, an apparel line or anything like that, an apparel company. It's really a tool within our marketing toolkit, which we use to kind of further expand, the world that we're building around the drink, right? And as I alluded to earlier, our strategy is, to connect with creatives, like create yourself. And so that means like we could create, many things that they can experience and would drive buzz. So, as I started with our content, Recess IRL. We recently made a cloud popping game with Poolside FM, plus press play to pause your thoughts. And, Reality Wear is, I'd say, a brand platform within our marketing strategy, which is creating objects, right? Whether that's apparel, or we just did playing cards, candles, blankets, like you name it, like we could create it. But it's, again, they're meant to be kind of small drops of these objects, of products that like extend our, brand language and our brand world, onto these products. And they also serve as, like, I think long-term, I have this idea of, like, I call it marketing that makes money, right? If you can do revenue generating brand marketing activities, well, that's incredibly scalable. Like, I like to think about, like, what if we had merch, like real merch, when we had Recess IRL? Like, that would have changed the economics of that space dramatically. Right? So, I just think it's, it's ultimately a tool within our marketing toolkit. It's not like a focus, from a revenue standpoint or anything like that. But, as we, continue to run these kind of holistic marketing programs that across the whole platform, we think having, merchandise and additional products that you can buy besides the drink for the design component, makes sense for our audience.
Very cool. 2 questions, and I'm going to let you get back to your day. One, like, where are you going 2020 and beyond? Because, like, obviously we don't have to rehash what a shit show this year has been, excuse my French, but it seems like this was a pretty good year to have Recess in the world, and B, like, where are you going from here?
Yeah. So, look, I think the past 2 years was really about kind of establishing ourselves as, the leading and defining brand of this category, both, the CBD beverage category, but as I think of it, this broader relaxation category, that is emerging. And I had to then go, build out an organization and a team and a supply chain, that could support this. And so, we've, part of the strategy there has been, no one on the brand side has ever worked in beverage, and everyone on sales, finance, operations, supply chain is like best in class CPG people, right? And so, I look at what we've done is really set a foundation that will allow us to scale rapidly, over the years to come, right? And this is a, somewhat of a unique business plan to kind of, I'd say, invest ahead of, like, the ultimately massive inflection point in the business. But, next year you're going to see Recess become a true platform and enter additional categories. We're bringing the brand, to new markets. We're about to launch in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, Northern California with, top distributor there. You'll see us enter, new channels. So we'll, be entering national retailers and in places like Amazon. And then you'll also see a lot of, I'd say, progress on the regulatory side, which should open up things further. And, we've been spending a huge amount of time there to on, call it, advocacy work. But I think that's going to, really pay off next year. And so, Recess should really, I think our distribution will grow, significantly over the next 12 months.
Awesome. The last question is, where can Open Dialogue viewers find you? Where you or Recess itself?
Yeah. So for Recess, it's takearecess.com, and our Instagram handle is at takearecess. And then you can find me on Twitter. I think my handle is at Ben Witte. And then on Instagram, it's at bwitte. And so, there's the places.
Thanks for doing this, Ben. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's fun. Thank you.
We'll see you soon. That's great.
Cool.
It was awesome.
Yeah. It was a little early, but I got it done.
Oh, you nailed it. I mean, I would never know that it's 7:30 in the morning for you. Truly.
Yeah, no, all good. Are you still in New York?
Yeah, I stayed the entire time, and it was something.
Yeah. No, for me, I was pre-COVID. I was getting I need a break from New York, and I'm from here originally. And then COVID was when I went around. All right, this is a sign. I should. Right. But I was back all of August. I was back, a couple weeks ago. I definitely miss it. And I think there's a really cool energy there.
Yeah, it's good. I like it. I mean, the winter is going to be very challenging, so we'll see how that pans out. But it's been pretty fun. Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Well, great to finally meet you again. Totally about you as well, and we should definitely stay in touch. And I look forward to seeing this episode. For sure. We'll hit you up and send you the link ahead of it being live. So thank you again. We'll see you.